Over the last few years, we have seen huge trades completely reshape the NFL landscape right before the draft. I'm talking about A.J. Brown, DJ Moore, Jerry Jeudy, DeAndre Swift, and more. And on today's show, Jeff Bell and I, we're going to discuss some veterans who are likely to move between now and the NFL draft. Jeff, last year we saw Justin Fields and Sam Howell get cleared out from their teams, the Bears and the Commanders, so those teams can go out and draft Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels. Right now, sitting atop the draft board are the Tennessee Titans, who seem poised to take Cam Ward. So let's start with Will Levis. I think he's probably one of the guys that's likely to get moved. Do you think that there's going to be another team out there that might have interest in actually trading for Will Levis, though?
Give me a team, Dave. What do you think?
I mean, I didn't think the Seattle Seahawks were going to trade for Sam Howell last year, but it happened.
That's a good point. What about the Vikings? They do not have a backup quarterback, and maybe that is somewhere that Kevin O'Connell could kind of maybe try to rehab Will Levis, similar to what happened with Darnold behind J.J. McCarthy coming in there. I mean, trying to just look at teams that don't have any other options right now, and they do stand out as one that could be in play.
Yeah, I believe you said you coined the term the quarterback or Kevin O'Connell school of learning how to play quarterback. I think you coined on a show a couple of weeks ago, and Will Levis could probably benefit from that. So I think he's one of those guys that could get traded because I don't know, though. I don't know if this is a situation where you look at Sam Howell. There were a lot of people in Washington that loved Sam Howell. And in Chicago, of course, you had a huge swath of fans that loved Justin Fields. I mean, Cam Ward would have to be like historically bad for Tennessee fans to start clamoring for Will Levis again, right?
Yeah, I can't imagine it being there. And I think that that's the other part of it of you don't imagine him losing his job. He's not going to lose his job to Will Levis. But Will Levis's contract is low enough that you can hold him as a backup quarterback. That being said, they did bring in Brandon Allen, and Brandon Allen is kind of one of those just the type of backup quarterback that you want in the room, probably with Cam Ward, whereas like he's no threat to take the job, but he's played, he's seen some things. I think maybe another team out there, if trade for him might be a little bit aggressive, but the Bengals with I think they still like Jake Browning, but maybe they take a bet on Will Levis behind Joe Burrow and just kind of you're just throwing it out there as a young player that can develop potentially.
Yeah, and who knows? Maybe Will Levis could get that Kenny Pickett treatment, go to another team, and end up with a few snaps in the Super Bowl. If he ends up in the right position, I think that's the only way Will Levis will see that. But let's talk about some veterans here. Will Levis still on his rookie contract. We've seen him for a couple of years, but Kirk Cousins is a name, Jeff, that keeps kind of popping up in my head. Still sitting on a pretty big contract right now, and didn't look like himself last year. But when you factor in that he was a 37, 38-year-old quarterback coming back from an Achilles tear on his plant foot, no big shocker that he didn't have the same zip on his ball that he had in years past. And I think that they had kind of planned for the future already with Michael Penix. So right now what we're hearing from Arthur Blank is that they are happy with Kirk Cousins as their backup. And they think that they've got one of the best backups in the league. But let's say the Pittsburgh Steelers, for whatever reason, the draft doesn't shake out the way that they want, and they don't get the guy that they want. Jalen Milroe gets sniped from him. Jackson Dart gets sniped from him. Aaron Rodgers goes and decides to bury himself in a hole in Peru or whatever he does this year. Do you think maybe the Pittsburgh Steelers call up the Falcons and say, hey, Kirk Cousins, is he available? Do you think there's any other teams out there that might be interested in Kirk Cousins?
For a long time, it seemed like Kirk Cousins would be inevitably going to the Browns, but so that's always been in my mind. But yeah, I mean, the Steelers, I just am very, very skeptical the Steelers are going to walk into the 2025 season with Mason Rudolph and Skylar Thompson as the top two quarterback options. I think that they're definitely going to do something. Either it's draft a player like Jalen Milroe, like we talked about our other episode this week, or to go get especially Aaron Rodgers, but Kirk Cousins as well.
Yeah, and I think Aaron Rodgers, I mean, they're kind of at his mercy right now. It seems like they've been holding out for Aaron Rodgers to the point that now the only other option would be reaching for another quarterback in the draft. You got to remember the Steelers don't have a round 2 pick either. So if they do need a quarterback, they can't afford to wait until the third. They might have to reach early in the first. So Kirk Cousins makes a lot of sense. And then you also mentioned the Browns, which I think would be a good fit. Of course, they've already got a lot of cap space tied up in Deshaun Watson, and to bring in Kirk Cousins for another 40 million in cap space, they'd have to find some way to work that out. But if they do use that number 2 overall pick on Travis Hunter and they're unable to move up for another quarterback they want, it might make sense for them to go out and ask for Kirk Cousins. So right now, Kirk Cousins is one of those guys after losing his job to Michael Penix, getting up there in age. I think dynasty communities have just kind of written Kirk Cousins off for dead at this point. What do you think is a reasonable ask if you're out there trying to get Kirk Cousins? Is he just one of those throw-ins in a trade, or are you going out and maybe trading a third-round pick in hopes that he can bounce back somewhere?
I think given the rookie fever season that we're in right now, a third round pick might be a little bit aggressive for Kirk Cousins, but maybe like a fourth plus player that you're ready to give up on, something like that potentially. Just if you, because who's holding Kirk Cousins and what are they asking for
Yeah.
Kirk Cousins is kind of where a lot of that lands.
I did overestimate the age a bit. I said 37, 38. He's still 36 years old, which we are seeing quarterbacks now regularly play into their late 30s, early 40s. So um, I'm not a believer that Kirk Cousins just is completely washed and forgot how to play football. I think a lot of the struggles that we saw last year came from him trying to recover from that Achilles. I mean, you could look at Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers was terrible to start the season, and then he kind of put it together over the last month of the season. We didn't see Kirk Cousins afford that ability because he lost the job to Michael Penix, but there still might be another opportunity for Cousins to get another couple of starts or a couple seasons of starts, I should say, under his belt.
I
Let's talk
think
about some. Yeah.
just real quick on Cousins there. I think when you flash back to that season, if you go back to week 2 against the Eagles there late in that game, it seemed like he cut it loose a little bit relative to the way he started the season, that awful game against Pittsburgh. And he was just, I feel like you could almost see it through watching the game where he just said, this is going to hurt, but these are the throws that need to be made. And he had a pretty strong month or so after that.
Mhm.
And then it just really fell off. I think it was kind of the probably playing through everything and the inability to drive with his legs and like he normally would just got up to be too much as the season went on.
Now, I want to talk about a few other guys that were former day 3 picks, would probably get moved for very, very little if they do move at all. But I feel like these are the guys that we see get moved often near the draft. Sam Howell, Jake Haener, Spencer Rattler, Tyson Bagent. These are all guys who are still young that have tools that teams are excited about and are all on teams now that have had coaching changes. You know, the guys that traded for Sam Howell last year in Seattle are now gone. The guys that traded for or that drafted Jake Haener and Spencer Rattler are now gone. And the guys who made an investment in Tyson Bagent in Chicago, now gone. And I think all of these guys do have some desirable traits. Could you see any of these guys realistically getting moved? And if so, could you see any of them? Or maybe there's other guys that I'm forgetting about, but the outside of the guys that I mentioned, Sam Howell, Jake Haener, Spencer Rattler, Tyson Bagent, do you think these guys could get moved, or is there anybody else that I'm leaving off of this list, or do you think that we're just too deep in the weeds to even keep having this discussion?
I think one of those Saints quarterbacks is going to get moved, and both could if the Saints invest or an early round pick on a quarterback. And they're definitely a team that should consider that relative to what we saw from Derek Carr. So that I think is in play. I don't think Howell, even though they've changed coaches, I don't think that I don't really have that one going on there. And Badgett, I think is just a little bit too far below the radar, in my opinion.
Let's talk about some
But
wide
I know
receivers
that
here. Yeah.
wasn't there like some wasn't Tyson Bagent's dad causing some friction last year for the Bears? So
Yeah,
I mean,
I can give you the kind of the down low here. He became like good friends with the Chicago radio guy, and then was basically going on Chicago radio, and he was frequently saying like, "Oh, there's people in the locker room saying that Bajan should be starting over Caleb Williams," and basically getting on this platform to millions of people and just spreading false propaganda about his son. And my understanding is that somebody talked to him and said, if this continues, your son is off the team. And then Tyson Bagent's dad stopped going on the radio, and it's been smooth sailing ever since.
you think you'd have something else to say on the radio if you still do the radio, just don't say that about your kid.
Uh-huh. So let's talk about some wide receivers, and I think there are some big names here. Tyreek Hill, last year we definitely saw, you could say that he loses a step but the data actually supported it. If you look at the top speed that Tyreek Hill was able to get to last year, nowhere close to what he's done in previous years. So there was clearly some sort of lack of effort, loss of athleticism, whatever it may be. He wasn't the same player, was also dealing with a wrist injury and had one of the worst years he's ever had in his career. And we're hearing rumors now that Tyreek Hill could potentially be traded. I think a reunion with Kansas City would just be so much fun. Just throw him in a wide receiver room that's already pure chaos. But if it's not Kansas City, there's another team that could move out there. My fear, though, Jeff, is that Tyreek Hill, even if he does land with another team, I don't know if his situation gets any better than it is right now in Miami, where they have made him the focal point of this offense, where he's getting super valuable targets deep downfield on a consistent basis. My worry would be that wherever Tyreek Hill goes, it's going to be a negative for his value.
Yeah, and I think that that's fair because of the way that we've seen Mike McCarthy or not Mike McCarthy, Mike
Mike
McDaniel
McDaniel,
be able
it's
to
late.
scheme
It's
up.
late at night. It's
It
okay.
is
You can
late
make
at
those
night.
mistakes.
Mike McDaniel scheme up plays around, scheme up really an entire offense around Tyreek Hill. But really, you flash back to 2 years ago when he was chasing that 2,000-yard mark. He got hurt late in that year, and I feel like it just hasn't been the same since.
Yeah, and I think that that's noteworthy. But a team out there might be willing to make a move, and a player to watch. That being said, I think Tyreek Hill is a guy that I'm trying really hard to move off of in Dynasty. Typically when you see these players start to trend downward, rarely do they tick back up, and very rarely do they go to another team and resuscitate any sort of value. So if he's at that age where he's lost a step, production is ticking down, and they're talking about potentially moving him, he's a player that window probably already closed on. You probably should have traded him away before last season, but if you could still get a late first or an early second from somebody out there who is still allured by the possibility of Tyreek Hill going to a new spot, definitely taking that. Another name to talk about, Jeff, and this one probably isn't quite as exciting as it would have been a couple of months ago, but we've been hearing trade talks about Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel for years. And you look now, it seems like the San Francisco 49ers have done a good job setting them up for the post Debo and post Ayuk era. They've got Ricky Pearsall. They extended Juwan Jennings. Jacob Cowing is a guy that they like quite a bit. Do you think that Ayuk still is a potential trade candidate, or do you think now that Debo is out of the picture, they are going to build around Ayuk as the piece of the future?
I'm trading Brandon Ayuk at this point. I think is getting too cute by half. I think that you've made that choice, and I was a big believer last year that if they had the ability to trade Debo Samuel, he would have been traded already. And Brandon
Mhm.
Ayuk was that player that was that true number one wide receiver skill set, the that you are able to build around. And he is the type of player that you can function with Juwan Jennings and with Ricky Pearsall to make those two players work because of the versatility that Brandon Ayuk offers you relative to Debo Samuel being kind of stuck into
Yeah.
one type of role. And so, yeah, I think that I'm there on. I don't see this really being in play unless I know there was a team that really, really wanted Brandon Ayuk last year, and we might talk about them next.
There are two teams that seemed to really want Brandon Ayuk last year, and we're going to talk about one of them next. And the other one ended up settling for Debo Samuel when they couldn't get Ayuk. I think they just changed their sights a little bit. But yeah, the next team that we want to talk about, it seemed like last year the Pittsburgh Steelers really wanted Brandon Ayuk. They didn't get Brandon Ayuk, but they did get DK Metcalf. And now because they got DK Metcalf, there is this talk that George Pickens is a potential trade candidate. And the Steelers have never shied away from trading receivers in their prime. Saw them get rid of Antonio Brown. We saw it with Chase Claypool. We've seen it with Deontay Johnson. And now there's rumors swirling that because they have DK Metcalf, they might be inclined to get rid of George Pickens. Do you see that as a possibility, Jeff, or do you think that they like this 1-2 punch they have with these two guys?
I think if you were really going to talk about a trade, um, something between Brandon Ayuk for George Pickens, I think you'd have to give value probably to the 49ers. But when you look at those two players, I think Brandon Ayuk's game would complement DK Metcalf really, really well. Brandon Ayuk's game would complement everybody really well.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, George Pickens plugging him into that 49ers offense as that
Oh,
deep
boy.
threat, and then allowing Ricky Pearsall to work underneath and allowing Juwan Jennings to do kind of a lot of what he was able to do in the intermediate area last year. And we've seen in flashes. I mean, that makes some level of sense, maybe, but I think that certainly the way that the season ended last year with Pickens is a red flag and a major concern, because the
Yeah.
Steelers seem like the type of organization that aren't going to put up with a lot of that. But at the same time, there was probably
They
a
have
lot that they put
before.
up with Antonio Brown and some other players previously, that maybe it kind of comes around. But maybe it is the type of bringing DK Metcalf in there, and maybe DK Metcalf's able to get in George Pickens' ear a little bit or calm him down, or put Pickens into a position where Arthur Smith only ignores him for 4 targets a game instead of like 8. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know what Mike Tomlin is doing in that locker room in Pittsburgh, but they've got like the Chernobyl new safe confinement over the top of it there, because nothing gets out, and then these players leave Pittsburgh and just go absolutely crazy. So I haven't even thought about that. We're talking about two of these guys, Brandon Ayuk and George Pickens, that there could be some sort of trade that involves both of them. And I think in a vacuum, Brandon Ayuk is the much, much better player, but George Pickens is younger. He's still on his rookie contract. Brandon Ayuk, 76 million guaranteed on his contract still, coming off of a torn ACL. I don't even know where those discussions would start. Like, I don't know which side would have to add to that side, or if the ACL and the contract and the age is enough to just balance the scales there. But that's an interesting one, Jeff. I will be thinking about that probably more than I should be. Let's talk about one more receiver. Courtland Sutton is a guy who, came on strong last year, had one of the best years that he has had in his career. Definitely the best year he's had since his ACL injury, which seemed to plague him for a couple of years afterwards. But now we're getting a lot of smoke out of Denver that Courtland Sutton could potentially be traded. And this kind of feels reminiscent to that Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel situation, right? Like, they had two wide receivers. It seemed like for years they wanted to trade one of these guys. Well, they finally traded Jerry Jeudy last year, but there's still smoke about them wanting to maybe trade Courtland Sutton. If he did get traded, where do you think is a potential landing spot?
Well, before they got DK Metcalf, I would have said the Steelers, because it seemed
Yeah.
like there was a lot of steam between Courtland Sutton and the Steelers there. I mean, I believe that the 49ers and Broncos, I think they have a good long history of, because didn't Adam Peters come from, well, that's Washington, I guess, came from Denver, but I don't know. I don't know, but maybe it's just Cecil is the reason why I'm putting those two pieces together. But no, they've talked about it quite a bit. I mean, the Jets might be in play if they were really wanting to do that. But again, you don't really have Marvin Mims flashed, but to move off of Courtland Sutton just for Marvin Mims and uncertainty feels like a lot at this point. But
I think the way that I could see it happening is them drafting a wide receiver or a
yeah,
tight end. We've heard a lot about them, interested in Colston Loveland, interested in Mason Taylor, possibly, if Luther Burden lands there. And then they already went out and they got
Dylan,
Evan Ingram in free agency. So they've got, one guy in Evan Ingram. They've got the promise of Marvin Mims and then another first round talent. They could offload quite a bit of salary by trading Courtland Sutton. So I understand why the rumors are floating out there. But at the same time, that was Bo Nix's guy last year. Like, Bo Nix looked really good, and he was going to Courtland Sutton early and often. They connected on some spectacular catches last year. It would be kind of surprising for me to see a team pull away a guy's favorite target, but crazier things have happened. Let's talk about the positions that I think are most likely to move here, and that's the running backs. These are the guys that we actually see happen. It's funny. I let off the show again. We always do this when we get like 15 minutes into the show, where we can kind of talk a little bit more honestly. We have to have that catch at the top of the show, right? Like AJ Brown, DJ Moore. Well, guess what? Because of the AJ Brown and DJ Moore trades, probably not going to see premier wide receivers in their athletic peaks get traded anymore, because both of those teams that did that kind of blew up in their faces. Running backs, however, though, are the position that we do see traded a lot. And we have talked about Brees Hall as a trade candidate on this show quite a bit. Alfredo Brown and I talked about it with Matt Kelly from Roto Wonderworld on our show just about a week ago. And now we have reports coming out that they are looking at Brees headed as part of a 3-headed committee, and that they are likely to trade him, and that they might draft Ashton Jinty. I don't know what I'm supposed to make of this story, Jeff. Try to interpret this for me, because it makes absolutely no sense.
if you trade Brees Hall for what 50 cents on the dollar to take Ashton Genty at 7th overall, and then put him into a timeshare with Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis, I mean, I don't know what you're doing. I don't understand a lot of this. I guess is just play.
I
Brees
mean,
Hall was
I'm at a
good.
loss too. I
I
don't get
mean,
it.
Brees Hall was really, really good to end the 2023 season, and then he was he struggled last year. Their offensive line struggled. Their offense as a whole struggled. I don't know. This feels like they get cute and like the Chiefs grab Brees Hall for like a third round pick, and then all of a sudden it's like Saquon Barkley all over again, and you're just like, okay, well that was really dumb that we let them have that. But I don't know. I think it's silly season when it comes to rumors on some of these.
That's kind of what I'm chalking this up at, but at the same time, you can't ignore the usage last year. Like, no disrespect to Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis, but they are nowhere near
Oh,
Brees Hall's level. And when they are getting workload alongside Brees Hall, and then a new coach comes in and says, yeah, we kind of view him as part of a committee as well. I don't know. Like, I'm not an NFL decision maker. I'm not a head coach. I'm not in a front office. I am a guy who watches football in the comfort of my home, but Brees Hall is a good football player. Like, I don't know why he's being treated on the same level as these other guys.
so my Monday article that I write in the season, I break down all the backfields, and I had a running joke because I dared to suggest that Brees Hall, when he was going number 1 overall in some fantasy drafts, might be in a committee. And I had a little bit of a running joke in my column where every single week I would point out the usage and say it was definitely not a committee that the Jets are employing right now with Braylon Allen and Brees Hall. But
It was frustrating, but something to watch for. Now, I think this player, which funny enough was traded shortly before the draft just 2 years ago, and now we might see it again. DeAndre Swift. It's no surprise that DeAndre Swift and Ben Johnson had some time together in Detroit, and he was very much so the secondary back behind Jamal Williams there. And he did okay in fantasy because he had the out as a pass catcher when he was healthy. He was heavily involved in the passing game, but he clearly was not the guy that Ben Johnson trusted near the goal line, didn't trust him in short yardage situations, didn't trust him with early down work as well. And now Ryan Poles came out and said the number one need for the Bears is running back. And we've heard Ben Johnson drooling over Ashton Jinty and Omarion Hampton and Travion Henderson. So I think it makes a lot of sense that DeAndre Swift gets traded. I don't even know where I'm going with this conversation, Jeff, because I don't know where he's getting traded. I don't know who's going to give up anything for him. Maybe they just flat out release him. Maybe they do draft Ashton Jinty and they keep Swift there as a reserve guy. I don't really know what to expect with DeAndre Swift, but he's a player that I don't have on a single dynasty roster, and I don't feel upset about it.
yeah, and he had a run last year. Well, he started out horrible, and then he was actually pretty good for a little while. He just wasn't getting touchdowns like you would hope, because if you remember last year, he would do all the work and get down to the one, and instead of Jalen Hurts coming in, they would bring in gosh, what's the other
Roshan
batter?
Johnson.
Roshan
But to
Johnson
be fair,
come in and
to
get
be
the
fair, they did make DeAndre Swift. They gave him ample opportunities at the goal line, and he was horrendous. I mean, there was one where he lined up on first and goal at the one and took a 9-yard loss. Like, he is terrible at the goal line. So I understand why they pulled that from him.
I get it. I get it. Yeah, but as we talk about, I mean, I don't. The, who would trade for him? Yeah, I mean that's a significant question. I mean, I'm running through the list right now, and I don't. I mean, the Raiders, maybe. I guess. I don't know if the Raheem Mostert's going to be the starting running back for the Raiders, but other than that, yeah.
All right. I think the next guy I want to talk about is somebody who would make a lot of sense to get traded to the Raiders. Zach Charbonnet. And I wish I could take credit for this, but it was Dave Richard over at CBS pointed out that Zach Charbonnet was drafted by Pete Carroll after being coached by Chip Kelly in college. And now Pete Carroll and Chip Kelly are both in Las Vegas. We've already heard Clint Kubiak has just been gushing over Kenneth Walker and hasn't really said much of anything about Zach Charbonnet. So I think if you're kind of reading the tea leaves here, I think that would make a lot of sense. If they don't want to spend up on Ashton Jinty, or if Jinty goes before 6, they might make a trade for Zach Charbonnet. But I think he's one of those guys that makes so much sense to trade right now. Like, you already have a very good running back in Ken Walker. And of course, they do have complementary skill sets. So Seattle might just be happy to keep both of them. But Zach Charbonnet is one of those guys that was a round 2 pick that they got 2 years of usage from and can probably still trade him for a round 2 pick.
Yeah, you see Pete Carroll going to the Raiders, and obviously some connections between the Seahawks with Pete Carroll and the Raiders and a power running back. That makes sense. I mean, Pittsburgh's got Jalen Warren and not much else in their backfield. That would make some sense to plug Zach Charbonnet into that type of backfield. I think it gets tough with some of these running back trades because there's so much depth in this class when it comes to running backs that teams might say, do we want to go by this guy, or do we want to take the rookie that's got a couple more years on his contract as a cheap option? I mean, I know Dynasty, we certainly fall for rookie fever, but I think the NFL can get that a little bit too.
Let's talk about your Buffalo Bills for the last running back to talk about here. And we kind of alluded to this. I can't remember, Jeff. We're doing so many shows together. I can't remember one of the shows that we've done over the last couple of
Last
weeks.
week.
We talked last week. Yeah. We talked about James Cook being a potential trade candidate because he has had a big contract ask. And they have, a handful of backs over there that I think they're pretty happy with, and Ray Davis. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they brought Ty Johnson back as well, right, Jeff? So they've
Yeah,
got
and
two running backs that have been with the team and have been looking good when afforded the opportunity. And then, of course, they have maybe one of the best goal line backs in the league in Josh Allen. So if James Cook is out here asking for 15 plus million a year, he is also a guy that could be traded between now and the draft. Again, kind of asking you the same question. We're really trying to guess as best as we can here. Do you think there's any team specifically that might be interested in James Cook?
well, I want to circle back and ask you. I think in our fantasy minds, we would certainly have one way that we would lean, but on the trade market in the NFL, Brees Hall or James Cook for an NFL team.
Oh, Brees Hall by a mile for me. I
You
think he is a
sure?
much, much better
By a
back than
mile?
James Cook by a mile.
By a mile? You really
Three
think
three
that?
quarters three quarters of a mile, maybe.
I don't know. I think teams would have that conversation about who is really better there, but that's
Are you
my
talking about
opinion.
like the same cost? Because I think James Cook, if he's a little bit cheaper, might be more alluring. But I'd
I'll say it
imagine
this
that
way.
most NFL teams, yeah.
I think the cost would be a lot closer between the two than probably a lot of people in the fantasy mindset would realize. But that's my opinion.
Now, do you think
But
the Bills do the Bills thing that they do and give James Cook to the Kansas City Chiefs as they like to do so frequently, or do you think that they finally have a no trade with the Kansas City Chiefs clause?
I do not believe that James Cook will be a Kansas City Chief. I'll say that.
That would be
So
infuriating.
so years of it's tough because years of Bills fandom, what they were in a cycle for a long time where they would have either a good running back or a good cornerback or a good linebacker that would hit free agency and they would lose them and then they would just go draft in the first round that same position again and they would do it over and over and over again and that certainly drove me crazy because I'm thinking about like players like Nate Clemens or like Willis McGahee and he leaves and
Uh-huh.
they draft Marshawn Lynch and so
Then
that
he leaves.
Stephon Gilmore leaves and they go draft Trey White. So that the cycle of allowing these guys to walk in free agency, they've broken that I think a little bit though. But that's kind of more to that point is they've done a really really good job this offseason of locking up their young players under the radar. I think they have a lot of guys that are very very good that outside of like hardcore NFL fans don't even realize. And they got ahead of the market on a lot of the players. And so James Cook was the one player that was remaining. And the media asked Brandon Beane, hey, you've been really aggressive about locking up your young guys and taking care of them. And you've got one guy that didn't get a contract. And Brandon Beane basically said, we're done with that phase of the offseason. We're moving on to the draft now. So
I did hear that, yeah. Well, let's go ahead and talk about some tight ends because I think these are maybe some of the guys that are most likely to get moved here. And Kyle Pitts is the guy that I want to lead off with. Former top 5 pick that has struggled with some injuries, showed some flashes. I mean, I just ran it's a little muddled because he came into the league young and 17 game seasons and pass happy league and all that. But like when you look at tight ends, what they've done through their first or through their age 24 season, it's like Rob Gronkowski, Dallas Clark, Mike Ditka, Travis Kelsey, and Kyle Pitts. I mean, he's right there. Like he has been productive, but for whatever reason, the Falcons don't seem to like him all that much, and Atlanta Falcons fans don't seem to like him all that much. And they've got Drake London there. I think they're pretty happy with the team they have, but Kyle Pitts seems like a team that there might be another team out there that values Kyle Pitts more than the Falcons does. Do you think there's any chance that he gets moved here, or do you think that they're just going to let him kind of ride out the remainder of his rookie contract?
flashback to week 7, I think it was week 17 last year in that Sunday night game against the Commanders. And you remember Michael Penix hit, I
Mhm.
believe it was Kyle Pitts, down the seam for that big touchdown.
Yep.
I think I think there's been a lot of things that have happened with Kyle Pitts. I think that Arthur Smith didn't prioritize Kyle Pitts. I think that there was, other than his rookie year when he played with Matt Ryan, he didn't have a quarterback that was capable of really getting him the ball. And I think last year was a big part of that, because where Kirk Cousins really, really struggled last year was driving the ball over the middle of the field. And that is where you're
Mhm.
going to hit Kyle Pitts. And so then when we saw Michael Penix come in, he had that huge play against the Commanders over the middle of the field, driving the ball into a tight window to Kyle Pitts to score a big touchdown. And so I think it's, you look at Pitts relative to the rest of how many, like the really good fantasy tight ends, and a lot of those guys are able to do a lot more after the catch than I think Pitts is kind of able to do, or at least the way that you want to utilize Pitts is kind of sending him and utilizing his size and athleticism down the seam instead of getting
Mhm.
the ball to him quickly and allowing him to create after the catch. And that doesn't really lend itself to a lot of yak yardage because he's going up and getting the ball. And usually when you're going up and getting the ball, you've got somebody that's taking out your feet when you're coming down. And so that, I think that there's just been a variety of things that have played into Kyle Pitts more so than the common belief that Kyle Pitts isn't particularly good. I don't hold that belief.
I'm trying to think of a good fit, a team that could use a guy like Kyle Pitts, and the one that keeps coming to my mind is the Houston Texans, where right now they've got Dalton Schultz and they locked him up on a relatively team-friendly deal. But outside of Nico Collins, they don't really have a number two there. You know, they've got Christian Kirk who can do some of his work in the short and intermediate parts of the field, especially across the middle of the field. But Nico Collins is a guy who can win outside the numbers, and he does have those in-breaking routes that he finds success with. But if they did have Kyle Pitts, going up the seam like he does so well, it would just make it even better for Nico Collins. So I think he's one of the teams that might, they're one of the teams that might have some interest there. But you look at it right now, the Falcons are going to have a tough decision to make after this year. Kyle Pitts is on his fifth-year option. They've got him locked up for about $11 million, and then he's a free agent after this year. So if he does start to have a good season where they know that they're going to have to really open up the checkbook to keep him beyond 2025, it might not be a draft day trade. He might be one of those guys that we see get traded in season.
Watch him end up with the Chiefs, because that's what's going to happen. It's like Travis Kelsey's going to retire, and then they're just going to, everybody's going to outthink Kyle Pitts, and the Chiefs are just going to sign Kyle Pitts, and then he's going to be the player that we all believed he would be.
The difference is, the only thing I'd push back on a little bit, Travis Kelsey's a phenomenal blocker. Like, he doesn't get the credit that he deserves for being a blocker. And Kyle Pitts is basically a wide receiver in a tight end's jersey number, if jersey numbers still matter in today's NFL. But it could be fun. I mean, all these players that we're throwing around, we're just going to keep saying, imagine them with the Chiefs, because that would be the best landing spot for a lot of these guys. The next guy I want to talk about, Dallas Goedert. Could you imagine him with the Chiefs, Jeff Bell?
No, I can't imagine, because the Eagles are not going to say we're not going to trade him to the team that we're going to play in the Super Bowl. But no,
Well, the reason I'm saying Dallas Goedert is because Howie Roseman just recently came out and said that what was it that he said? I'm forgetting the exact quote. They asked him about Dallas Goedert, and he said, "Well, he's on the team for now." I mean, it didn't sound like a resounding "we love this guy and we want to keep him here and he's a part of our long-term plans." It was, he's here. I'll throw out the team that I think that he's going to go to, Jeff. Indianapolis Colts. We talked
yeah,
about it. I know you said that Michael Pittman already kind of fulfills that tight end role for them, but Dallas Goedert, the two best seasons he ever had, just so happened to be the two best seasons that he had Shane Steichen as his offensive coordinator. They need a tight end, but I think they have more pressing needs that they can use that 14th pick overall on. So I think that Dallas Goedert going to Indianapolis just makes so much sense for both parties.
where do you think Grant Calcaterra is ranked on Keep Trade Cut?
Wide receiver 38.
He's certainly not wide receiver 38.
Or tight end 38, sorry. Figured he'd be
Tight end
way down there.
50. Tight end
Wow.
50.
The guy who was basically a one-to-one replacement for Dallas Goedert when Dallas Goedert was hurt
Tight end
last year, giving us almost
50.
identical production.
26 years old. Our good friend Coop has done a lot of good work on tight ends, and kind of that is kind of the the prime age range for tight end production, tight end breakout. I mean, just tight end 50. Just saying.
Yeah. Last week we did our He's Ranked Where show, and maybe Calcaterra should have been on that list. All right, Jeff, one guy I want to talk about here, and this is another guy that I think is really likely to be a draft day mover. And I thought last year maybe we'd see him get moved on day 2 of the draft after the Raiders went out and selected Brock Bowers 11th overall, but Michael Mayer is still there, a guy who was drafted in round 2 just a couple of years ago and really kind of got pushed to the back burner last year with Jacoby Myers there and with Devontae Adams there, and of course the emergence of Brock Bowers. I think there's going to be some team out there that wants to take a chance on Michael Mayer. I just don't know who it'll be. Any ideas?
Well, I hate to put it out in the world and break up the Ohio State triumvirate, but the Jets, they plugged Michael Mayer in there over Jeremy Ruckert. I mean, that seems pretty natural for a team that wants to play with some power element to their run game. I mean, Mayer can bring that, and certainly Sam Laporta was drafted right around the same range as Michael Mayer. So I don't know if Aaron Glenn was involved in that at all, but the Lions were looking at tight end in that draft, and Mayer was there. So,
it would make sense. And, I hate to throw it out there, but you look at the profiles for Michael Mayer and Travis Kelce, maybe the Chiefs go out and bring in Michael Mayer to sit. No, I'm kidding. We're done with the Chiefs talk. But Jeff, anybody else we missed today? We talked about a lot of guys that might get traded. This is a fun show. Probably not the most actionable to the audience. I mean, there's only so much
Grant
you can
Calcaterra,
do.
tight end 50.
Grant Calcaterra, trade away your Tyreek Hill, maybe pick up Kirk Cousins for really cheap. And if you're a Colts fan, I don't know, pre-order your Dallas Goedert jersey.
Yeah,
all right,
that all works. The Rams are probably going to add a tight end too. So
the Rams probably will, yeah. And I think Michael Mayer would make a lot of sense for the Rams. I mean, I know we kind of closed with him, but would really fill the hole left by a very aging Tyler Higbee. Well, on that note, I want to thank everybody for checking this episode out. If you like this episode, go back and check out the one we did on Tuesday where we talked about quarterback rankings. We looked at the incoming rookies and as well as the last 4 draft classes, kind of talking about how these guys would rank alongside guys who have been drafted in recent years. Jeff, this was a fun episode. We'll be back next week. We don't know what the topic is, but every Tuesday and every Thursday, you can find us here at the Dynasty Show YouTube channel. So be sure to like, subscribe, all those good things. And if you're listening on audio, please leave us a review because it means a lot to us. Thank you so much for tuning in. We will see you next week.